Who's got a penny? I'm kidding. That's right. 1 Samuel, chapter 18. We just finished chapter 17. This big dude, larger than life, gets killed with his own sword. Right? Chapter 18. You say, how long are you going to go? How many chapters are there in 1 Samuel? And the great thing is there's a second Samuel. Yeah. So we just keep right on going. On into eternity. And that too. To eternity and infinity. Yeah, it's like saying you got to give 150%. I thought a totality was 100%. Yes, but give it one more percent of a totality. Anyhow, those things don't keep you up at night? No? Okay. I must have a very small world then. Chapter 18. Interesting. The plot thickens. So back up just one verse in the 17th, looking at 58. And Saul said, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. This is right after he kills Goliath, holds up the head, and people are like going, wow, this dude, he's a stone cold killer. That's not what they said. And as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knitted to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. So Jonathan made a covenant with David, and because he loved him as his own soul, Jonathan stripped himself of his robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over men of war. And it was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. And as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistines, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines and songs of joy, and with musical instruments, and sang. And the women sang, however you want to translate that, to one another as they were celebrating, Saul has struck down his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. And they have ascribed to David 10,000, and to me they have ascribed 1,000. What more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed or distrusted David from that day on. Wow! A lot of problems here in this text. Liberals love going to this text, especially today, and we're going to look at a lot of these things. Notice what happens. As soon as he goes and he is taken into Saul's household, he becomes close friends with Jonathan. Now, my text says his soul knitted to the other one's soul. Does anybody have something different in their Bible? Or are we all reading ESVs here? Anyone? Same kind of phraseology? Loved him as himself? Okay. Did it say made a covenant, then said the souls of David knitted with that of Jonathan?
Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as much as himself.
And that's all it says. What you get there? In
The
Holman Christian Standard. NIV. Phraseology here is just what you have in ESV, and New American Standard kind of has the same thing, I think, is that the souls were knitted together or had a special bond together. In our current culture, a lot of people gravitate to this verse because you can make this verse sound very illicit. David and Saul, or David and Jonathan, they had a special relationship. Special. We had special people like that, and we called them special friends when I was in the Army. And basically, the implication that they're going with is this is more than just a brotherly love, but a love of more of a homosexual nature. Almost like a wedded union type of thing. And here's the thing with this. No, That's not what this text is talking about. If you look at what's going on here, you see that Saul sees this young man and says, wow, this is a great young man. Jonathan and him become such great friends that they are inseparable blood brothers. That Jonathan, when he looks at David, does not make the distinction that he is Jesse's son, but actually his very brother. This is going to be very important because David is going to be the usurper in Saul's eyes. You see here within Saul's own household that even Saul's household begins to like David to the point that, watch what Jonathan does. He recognizes that David is a man of war that God has blessed. And now let me ask you, how many swords were there in all of Israel? 2. And who had them? Saul and Jonathan. Jonathan takes off his robe, his outer garment, the nice kingly robe or the princely robe that he had, and puts it on David, a sign that, hey, this is an individual who is now like a brother to me. Not like a brother, but is a brother to me. Just like myself. You would treat him like you would treat me. And then he takes his armor and the prized possession of any Jew within the world, in that world at that time, an iron sword. Do you ever want to see the difference between something iron and made of bronze? Go get a piece of brass, and preferably not a bullet that's loaded. Okay, because if you smack it with something iron, you will have a different reaction. Just saying. Take something of very soft metal and smack it against something that's tempered. When I was a machinist, we used to make brass hammers, and I've got this little long piece of what we call a drop. It's the end of a bar that's worthless, except it's sell for scrap. And it's all dinged up and down one side. And I used to use it, and I'd wrap my little heat-treated tools with it. I just smack it and make a small adjustment. And you learn how to hit it just right to make it just a certain adjustment. And the great thing is when you hit the tool, it wouldn't break the tool. It wouldn't even damage the tool. It wouldn't even mark it. But it scarred the piece of brass. Imagine an iron sword hitting a piece of brass or soft metal. You are outmatched. So that's not something cheap. He takes this off and he gives it to David. Gives him his armor. And so notice, even within Saul's household, you see a bonding relationship beyond that soon is going to cause a problem inside this house. So for those, just for free, for those who say, hey, this relationship between David and Jonathan is homosexual in nature, the text doesn't support this. It is about a tight, bonded relationship between two individuals that are almost indistinguishable in their nature. Yes. Well, also kind of like you see forged with amongst guys in combat. I still have friends from and I deployed with the same unit twice. One of the rare chaplains to be able to do that. I still keep in touch with most of the guys from those units. Some of them are real jerks, but we have a unique relationship because it was forged within warfare that you look past the foolishness that they are at times. And I got a couple that you like go, hey, look, seriously, you got to back that train up. But it's a unique relationship that outside of a combat zone, we would have never ever been friends. We would have been trying to figure out how we are friends. And so you kind of have that relationship going on there, but it's much more tighter. It's almost like an inseparable bond of a brother with a brother. And so when people try to take that and make it go illicit, it really bothers me. But notice what Jonathan does. To demonstrate the level of the covenant and also to demonstrate his level of love, instead of leaving David in the position that he's in, he actually elevates him to being an equal peer by giving him all of his armor and giving him his sword. And this is not cheap stuff. Now, why is that important? Why is this important?
What sword did David use to slay the giant?
He used Goliath's swords.
Why didn't he keep it?
He does. And he kept Goliath's armor and his sword and went into his tent. The problem is when you're massive, it's like Chris Smith. Y'all seen Chris Smith, big tall guy would come here? While I could wear Chris Smith's body armor, and actually probably he and I wore about the same size body armor, I probably wasn't going to be wearing his length of trousers or his ACU jacket. I'd look like a kid wearing his dad's uniform. It would just dwarf me. Conversely, I have a big head, and they had to order my helmet. And so that's why I have it in the office, is that when they got ordered, it never made it onto the property books. And so when I tried to return it, they go, "Hey, sir, this is yours." Okay. My whole family has it. They had to order my brother's helmet and his football helmet when he played high school. So if you were to take my helmet and put it on somebody else's head, even an adult, it'd probably spin around. Goliath was a big man, so he took his armor. Yeah, it's great armor. Goliath probably had some awesome armor. David threw it on. It looks like a kid wearing his dad's suit. The sword probably was extremely unwieldy because a big man will wield a much bigger sword. Again, if you've ever seen The Hobbit, this would really help me out so much if you people would watch these movies. You have a hobbit that stands about this tall. He's got what he thinks is a sword he calls Sting, which is about this big. And he's talking to a dwarf, and the dwarf goes, "Well, swords are named after great men and renown." And he goes, "Well, what do you think about this?" He goes, "That's more like a letter opener." To a man, it would have been, when you see the movies, I'm kidding. You'll see that it looks more like a large hunting knife, and everybody else is having like swords that are like this tall, and his is like about that big. So, proportionate to size, Goliath's sword probably wasn't as useful for David as it would have been for Goliath. Fair enough? Okay. No, that rock pretty well dropped him where he stood. And so you have this action going on. And so notice what happens. It mentions David becoming and going out. I also notice what else he gives him. He gives him his bow and his belt. He gives him all these possessions. And he goes out with Saul. So that Saul set him over men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people and the sight of Saul's servants. So David now goes out in warfare, and he goes out and he's successful in his campaigning, and he goes out with Saul, and they are successful not at making sales, folks. Success in this story is David killing people. And so he is out, and he's making a name for himself, and Saul's servants are reporting this to Saul, and Saul sees that this is a great thing until the unthinkable. The women. It's always the women. Genesis, the women. I swear. Man. I'm going to stop right here because I'm right on the precipice and I don't want to get beat. What happens? Everything's looking good for David. Everything's going well. Everything's going well for Saul. But what happens? And as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistines, notice the phraseology there. When David returns from striking down the Philistines. The women came out from all the cities singing and dancing to meet King Saul. So you got this interesting thing that David has gone out and fought, and he's returning home, and there's this big campaign. It could just be that they both went out and fought together, and they're coming in together. But notice that the text mentions David before it mentions Saul, and so you see the tension building within the text with tambourines and songs of joy, and with musical instruments, and the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Apparently, they did not have political correctness at this time, because political correctness would say that you both sing the same thing to both of them, right? Saul's killed his tens of thousands, and so has David, right? That would be PC, because, if you've ever watched little kids play soccer, it's this giant scrum that moves around on the ground, and everybody gets a trophy. No? Okay. It'd be so much better if you watch those movies. Watch people, watch those movies and have nightmares the rest of your life. They sang this. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul has already seen the displeasure of Samuel. Saul has already been told that his son will not be his heir. And Saul has already been told that the kingdom is going to be torn from his hand. And now you have a young upstart. He does not know that he has been anointed yet, who has killed a giant while Saul hid in his tent, who's now a young man and has gone out and been put over men at war and have slain many Philistines, and according to the lady seem to think that he's killed 10 times as many as Saul has. Remember, Saul was a big man. A man head and shoulders above all the men of Israel. And now to return home knowing all this, he hears this song, and you can't think for a moment Saul is pleased. We see this reaction when people are the go-to, or they are the sole source of leadership, or they are the head of things, and then somebody comes in and they begin to take over more and more of the leadership. Have you ever seen that situation where people go, hey, take it, run with it? No, usually there's the, I don't feel necessary anymore. Have you ever seen the Andy Griffith show? Yeah, okay, there you are. Yeah. Don't get that Lord of the Rings stuff in here. Yes, I see that hand. Anyhow, do you remember the episode where Aunt Bee has to go out of town and she's throwing a fit over all the stuff she has to clean up? Opie left a peanut butter sandwich under the pillow. Andy's leaving shoes all over the place. All this stuff. And she goes out of town and they have run out of dishes. And so Andy says, hey, Ope, go next door and ask the neighbor for some eggs, bacon, and dishes. Right? Y'all remember that show? No. It's killing me. Now, anyhow, so I'll tell you the rest of it. Here we go. So she goes out of town. And they get the call, says, hey, I'm on the way to the bus stop, and it's a couple hours ride on bus. They decide they're going to go into a mass clean campaign. And they clean up the house because one of the ladies that Andy's sweet on says, you can't leave the house like this. And so they come in, they clean it all up, and it's spotless. And Aunt Bee walks in, and instead of going, wow, thank you, she gets all upset because she was expecting to clean up. I wish Stephanie was like that. That way I could get an A and be a great husband at the same time. You didn't clean up. I know. Anyhow, so you have this, and so then it dawns on her, because she's all grumpy now, it dawns on them that she was expecting to come in and clean up the mess. And so they messed the house up, so she has something to clean and complain about. Why? Because they did her job for her, and then she wasn't happy. And then all this. Have you ever noticed this, that when you have individuals who are in control of certain things, when a new person comes in to take over the position, it's usually not here's the reins, run, take it and run. I go screaming mad into the night. No, it's mine, and you have tensions over control. My last chaplainship I took over, I go in and I had this guy, and he was a real dirtbag. They had banned him from all 6 companies. He was living in the office getting BAH. And I was like, dude, brother, you're defrauding the government. Go away before I tell somebody. And so he was supposed to be out, and when I go into the office, he's got all the good stuff. And when you're the outbound guy, for those of you who are not military, when you're the outbound guy, you make a tiny footprint in the office. You take all the cruddy stuff and let the new guy have all the stuff they want, and you make the small footprint, and actually you don't even show up to the office because you don't really have a job anymore. You're just waiting to go. This guy was living there, had all the stuff, and finally after graduation day, my ASU's, which is the blue uniform, is hanging on a nail on the wall. And this guy just wouldn't leave. And I said, hey brother, how long are you going to be in my office? Oh, I plan to be here for another 3 or 4 weeks. No. Monday morning, you're gone. I don't care where you go, but you're gone. And he was a major. He just got promoted. And he started rubbing his chest and said, brother, I've told a colonel where to go. I am not afraid of your little oak leaf. Run along. I was already a non-select once. What were they going to do? And he got real upset. He could not let it go. And he got even more upset when everybody said, dude, this guy is awesome. And the guy we had and got rid of, he was a dirtbag. He really got upset with that. John, you see the same situation here with Saul. Saul is a lame duck. Saul knows he is the end of this line of kings. Saul knows that the people are going to start respecting this young man, and he may be a rival to Saul's throne. Little does he know yet that he is the rival to the throne. And the successor. And it will be his line and his house by which all the future kings, to include the greatest king ever, will come from. And Saul's line will be cut off. And it happens in one battle. Saul sees this and from a very selfish standpoint is not looking out for the betterment of David from this moment on, but now becomes jealous and envious. Ever see that? I've seen churches split over stuff like this. I've seen families split over stuff like this. I've seen industries go south over things like this. One guy who just can't let things go, and the other guy that comes in, it's just a problem. Why? Because it's a natural human instinct. Notice what Saul says. Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. They have ascribed to David 10,000. They have ascribed to David more than me. Well, gee, if you hadn't been hiding in your tent when the Goliath showed up, maybe they would ascribe 10,000 to you. Maybe if you hadn't tried to pay someone to go fight the giant for you, which you tried to do, they would sing the same level of praises to you. There is an indication here of Saul's character being revealed by the praise of the people around. It's kind of like the old saying, you know, if one person says that you're a jerk, they're probably a jerk. If 100 people call you a jerk, you're probably a jerk. Just saying. I get called that a lot, so I'm probably a jerk. So that's right. Especially if you kill 10,000 versus 1,000. But you see this here with Saul and David. And notice that it displeases him. Now wait a second. Let me ask you this question. Why would it displease the king? If the end goal is the subjugation of the Philistine army, and you have a guy who can really put the hurt on him, why would you be so offended and worried?
Because he might take his place.
Might take his place. Absolutely. But a good leader would look at this and go, well, I'll tell you what. This dude's burning it up. Guess what I'm going to do? Hey, brother, there's like this little outpost over there. Why don't you go take it out? I mean, you know, instead of utilizing his abilities, he becomes jealous of them. One more story and I'll give it up. There's a chaplain I worked with when I first got over to the Fires Brigade. When we went to White Sands, his dad had a heart attack, and the brigade commander, when I first got there, I was the only chaplain in the brigade, and I was covering 3 battalions and the brigade headquarters. And so I got to know everybody, and everybody got to know me pretty well. And so when a new guy came in, they said, well, you know, who do I have? He said, well, you got Chaplain Payne. And in a meeting which I was in, they began to say, this guy is awesome, and started really, and they thought they were building me up, and you could see this guy's face not be so happy. And so when we went to White Sands and he went home, they said, hey, look, Chaplain Payne has it. You go and take care of your family. And the guy flipped out. 3 days later, he came back to the training area after he was ordered to go home. Said, oh, everything's okay. Colonel was earlier said, no, seriously, I told you to go home. Chaplain Payne has it. Why couldn't he go home and take care of it? Envy. He did not like the fact that there was somebody that was going to shine him or do better than him. I really could care less about that. I had a job to do, and I wasn't trying to take his job. I had just brand new captain. I was a long way away. But he could, and we had problems over this all the way through my second tour through Iraq. He had a constant problem with this. Why? Because he could not be the go-to guy. Saul had a problem with this because over and over and over, every time he turns around, the song that's being sung is that David is better than the king. And notice his response. They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed 1,000. What more can he have but the kingdom? Now granted, the kingdom is David's. He just hasn't obtained it yet. The kingdom is David's. And Saul eyed David from that day on. Saul suspicioned David from that day on. From that moment on, the relationship between Saul and David changed, not from as it was with Jonathan as a close brother. See, this is where that language at the first end is very important to this language on the back end. Jonathan and David's relationship does not change, but the relationship between Saul and David does. And Saul begins to eye David with a sense of conspiracy and threat, because this young upstart is going to take from him the kingdom. Well, the kingdom is already in David's hands. And the idea that this is going to happen and David's going to be the cause of this, no, it's going to happen because God is the cause of this. It's already been foretold. God said, you're done. God says, I've appointed David to be my next king. And so you see how suspicion begins and will eventually tear down this relationship and will actually come between a relationship between Saul and Jonathan. As we will look here in a little bit. To the point that Saul, a man who loved David greatly, as the text had noticed, it said, Saul and him who said you, where was it? I think it was back in 17. I'll find it. This individual who he had a great deal of respect for and made him a commander of troops, now suspicions everything he does. You start off way back with Saul. King, head and shoulders above everyone. Goes out successful in one battle. And from that moment on begins down a road of moral slide and degeneration. Now to the point that the man that God appoints to be the next king, he eyes with envy and suspicion. I've seen this. I think a great example within churches is if you know the history of First Baptist Dallas, when Dr. Criswell steps down, they bring in another individual to be senior pastor. They go through 3 senior pastors relatively quickly. You know why? Because while Dr. Criswell is a good pastor, as pastor emeritus, he should have left and let the new pastor gain ground. But since he stayed, he caused such a rift within that church. And it cost that church 3 really, really good pastors. One of them is O.S. Hawkins, who's the head of the annuity board. Why? He couldn't let it go. And in that tension and that jealousy, because he's no longer the man there, he caused a rift that wasn't there. Saul's doing the same thing here, but Saul's going to seek this boy's life. See how jealousy can tear things apart? It's going to tear apart this relationship between David and Jonathan, between Saul and Jonathan, and between Saul and David. You put that forward into churches and businesses and relationships at home, relationships amongst family, relationships in business, and how many times have you seen jealousy rip apart families, churches, businesses, communities? It's a dangerous road you begin to walk down. All over the fact that one person gets more credit than the other one. And that's what it boils down to. Questions? I'll ask some questions. Any other question? Before we wrap this up?
Do you think David's aware of the hostility at this point?
Is he aware of the hostility at this point? No, but he soon will be. I think that javelin being tossed at him is a pretty good indicator. That's like, so this is no, right? Right? How many of you have ever seen The Last of the Mohicans?
Yes.
Finally. Do you ever see the scene where the girl has the opportunity to go with the Huron captain or jump off? Yeah, that's like the ultimate no. That's the no every guy fears. I would rather jump off a cliff than to live with you. Every guy, when he asks out a female, is really worried that that's going to be the no. Anyhow, I digress. So that's a no, right? Okay, call me. I think David is unaware of the hostility now, but soon will become very much, and you begin to see it more and more in their interplay. And then Jonathan is unaware of it until a little bit later on. And we'll see next week that this odd phraseology comes up about a harmful spirit again. So we'll look at that. Any other question? No? Okay. Well, let's close out with a word of prayer and then we'll circle up. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and for this opportunity to look at your word and for the danger of jealousy and control. Clearly here from this passage you have an individual who has an issue. An issue with a man that you have selected to be king. An issue with the fact that his kingship has been rejected because of his own sin. And the beginning of the rift and retaliation between these two houses. Heavenly Father, over and over within our lives, we all can relay countless accounts of where people who thought they should have received more glory or more credit or more of anything become jealous to the point that it disrupts families, it disrupts lives. And the danger of control, the danger of jealousy, the danger of hurt. And we see how over and over hurt people, and while cliche-ish, it bears out. We have opportunities in our lives to build up from within, build up from without, to see those who aspire to be better at things, and instead of being jealous and leery of them, to pour into them to make them and push them to be better. Saul had an opportunity to do just that. And yet, instead of pouring into this young man, began to become suspicious of this young man. We ask for your watch care over us and for your blessing upon us. We ask these things in your name we pray. Amen.